Welcome to the 33rd Annual Mayor's Environment Expo. As we come together from around the city, I would like to acknowledge that the Calgary area, where the Bow and Elbow Rivers meet, is a place of confluence, where the sharing of ideas and opportunities naturally come together. Indigenous people were the original caretakers of this land and the first champions of environmental conservation. This land is a home that we all share, and it's vitally important that we protect our home, our environment, by working together. What drives my optimism is seeing the innovation and commitment to climate action from all of you, our students. I will continue to amplify youth voices on the climate crisis, and I look forward to hearing your ideas. I hope this session sparks conversations and encourages all of us to take greater action in protecting our environment. Thank you all for participating.
I would like to echo the territorial acknowledgement for the Mayor's Expo opening ceremony and remind everyone that we are broadcasting from the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in Southern Alberta and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We acknowledge all Indigenous urban Calgarians who have made Calgary their home. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jennifer Johnson, and I am Executive Director of the Alberta Tomorrow Foundation. And today, Robert and I will be presenting Alberta Tomorrow to you. Just a few housekeeping things. We will be using the question and answer feature in the tool. So put your questions in there. I will stop every once in a while and check those questions. And Robert will also be helping me if there are questions, but we want to make this interactive. So please ask any questions that you do have. The other thing we are going to be using is menti.com. I have 2 questions for you to answer on there. So the link to menti.com and the code are in the chat right now. So if you want to go and get that ready, you can. And I will start the official presentation. So I titled the presentation today, Visualizing Past and Future Growth in the Bow River Watershed, using our tool, Alberta Tomorrow. So Menti question number 1 is, what is a watershed? So I'm going to switch my screens and I'm going to close this one out. So I want you to figure out, discuss in the class, what words describe a watershed? What do you think a watershed is? Have you heard of this term before? I know there are some pretty obvious ones that might come to mind, but what does the word watershed mean to you? I'll give you a few minutes to just kind of think about that before I start bringing some of the words up on the screen. All right, water supply, river, clean, rough waters, big waves, glaciers, shallow, important. That's good. I'll give you a few more minutes to put some more words about watersheds. Any other ideas? So you're exactly right. What is a watershed? This is the official definition of a watershed. So it's a land area that channels rainfall and snowmelt to creeks and streams and rivers and eventually to outflow points, which may be reservoirs or Hudson's Bay or the ocean. And if you look at this diagram that I've included, it kind of shows that. Look at the arrows. Anywhere within that dotted line, that dotted yellow line will flow down to those creeks and rivers. Anything on the other side of the dotted line here will flow elsewhere. So that would be considered a different watershed. So that's what a watershed is. Now, we live within the Bow watershed, and change that takes place within the Bow watershed is really hard to see. And there are a few reasons why it's really hard to see. The first reason is, as human beings, we don't see change unless we actually look for it. And if you talk to psychologists, they will call this inattentional blindness. So let me explain what this is. We don't look for change. Sorry, we don't see change unless we look for it. Here's an example. This is a picture of me and my husband when we got married. This was 17 years ago. This is a picture of me and my husband last year out in the Bow watershed. Now, when I look at my husband, I think he still looks like that initial picture because I don't look at him and I don't look for change. I'm not looking at him and saying, oh yeah, I see you have a few more gray hairs or anything like that. So the landscape is exactly the same. We don't look for change. Sorry, we don't see change unless we actually look for it. So here's a satellite image of Calgary. And we could see the borders of Calgary because where all the houses are, it looks a little bit grayer. And this, I think, was at about 1980 or so. So I'm going to say your parents were already born in 1980. You weren't. But if we look at the picture on the right, now the borders are way over here. And if you live, say, in downtown Calgary, well, downtown Calgary might not have changed as much, and you didn't actually look for the change, so you didn't see the change. So our watershed has changed a lot, but if you don't look for it, you don't actually see it. Another reason why is we can't see the whole watershed at once. So here's a map of Alberta, and today we are going to be looking at the Bow watershed. So here's Calgary, there's Edmonton. This is the Bow watershed that starts in the Rocky Mountains. And then you can see it's a really weird shaped kind of watershed. But everything within that darker blue area, all droplets of rain or snowfall, will all lead to the Bow River. And the Bow River watershed then goes all the way till the end here. So just kind of before Medicine Hat. But we don't see the whole watershed at once, so we don't notice some of the change. The other reason why we don't always notice change in the Bow watershed is we can't get everywhere within the watershed. So for example, this is a picture of the Bow Glacier. I'm going to say that most of you have never been on the Bow Glacier because it's not really that accessible. So if you can't get everywhere in the watershed, you're not going to know about the change that's taking place on the watershed. Like, how much is this glacier receding every year? Well, you don't know because you can't even get there. The other reason why we don't always notice change is that we can't time travel. It'd be nice if we could. And Alberta Tomorrow actually allows us to time travel. We can look back to the year 1910. And we can look forward to the year 2050. You can't do that without some sort of a time traveling tool. And that's what Alberta Tomorrow allows us to do so that we can visualize that change in the landscape. So the Bow River watershed is what we are going to be discussing today. And here it is on the satellite imagery. So I'm guessing that you live within this Bow watershed because most people are probably in Calgary. But just to get a better idea, maybe you've been over here to Banff National Park. Maybe you've been to Canmore, driving along the ’1 highway. Maybe you've been to Cochrane, Airdrie, Okotoks is down here. Maybe you've driven past Bassano and the Siksika First Nation. Maybe on your way to Brooks or Medicine Hat. So that's the Bow River watershed. All right, so let's talk about Alberta in general for a second. And I'm going to use this model that I have of Alberta. This is my Lego model. And it's very simplified. It's very simplistic. But if we look at my model, what I'm trying to show is here's the shape of Alberta. We've got the Rocky Mountains right here. And I know there's some grade 4s out there. So you guys know that this is the Rocky Mountain natural region. Then we've got the Foothills natural region. We've got the Grasslands natural region, Parkland natural region, the Boreal Forest natural region. And then way up here, we've got the Canadian Shields natural region. And I don't know about you guys, but I've been to the Canadian Shield in many provinces in Canada, but I have never been to the Canadian Shield in Alberta because it's just this little corner up here. Another example of, I wouldn't know if that's changing because I can't really get there. So when we look at my model, there's a lot going on this landscape. And this would be Calgary down here, okay? And before we get into the simulator, I just want to explain what these colors are. So on our model, the green represents forested areas. The orange represents agricultural areas. The yellow represents grassland. And it used to be this whole area, but there's not that much of it left. The blue represents water and wetland areas. And the pink represents cities and towns. So like I said, this is a pretty crude model. This is Calgary, Red Deer, Edmonton. This would be Lethbridge down here, Medicine Hat, Lloydminster. Okay, so when we're using Alberta tomorrow, I want you to just kind of keep this in mind, okay? Because Alberta's population has been growing. So basically what that means is we need to get more pink Lego on our map, or our model. So how are we going to get more pink Lego on here? Well, we could take away some of the yellow and we could add pink. We can't have grassland and cities and towns in the exact same spot. So we could take away some forested areas and we could replace it with pink. We could take away some agricultural areas, replace it with pink. We could take away some water and wetland areas and replace it with pink. We could take away, what did I forget? Maybe I got all the colors already. Okay, so think about this, because if I go back to my presentation, the reality is that in Alberta, we can't do everything, everywhere, all the time. So just think about that. We can't just do everything, everywhere, all the time. What we have to do is we have to decide, what are we going to do? When are we going to do that? And where are we going to do it? So think about the Bow River watershed. We need to decide how much of that watershed do we want to be pink? How much of that watershed do we want to be green, forested areas? How much of the watershed do we want to maintain as yellow or grassland areas? We have to decide these things. What are we going to do, when, and where? So before I get into the simulator, do we have any questions? Robert, are there any questions coming in?
No, there's currently no questions.
Okay, then I bet you once we see the simulator, we'll have some more questions. All right, so we are now going to go and we're going to look at the Bow watershed, but we're going to look at it in Alberta tomorrow. And for some reason, I cannot change my little presenting window here. There we go. Okay. So in Alberta tomorrow, we can look at any watershed within Alberta, but we are going to look at just this Bow watershed. Looks a little different now than it did before because we've got the satellite imagery behind this map overlay. But what this map overlay is showing is over here, we have the Rocky Mountains. We've got some green forested area. We've got all of this yellow grassland. We've got blue water, open water. We've got light green wetland areas. And that's all we're really seeing. So what year is this? This is the year 1910. Okay, so think about that. Were you alive in 1910? No. Were your parents alive in 1910? No. Were your grandparents alive in 1910? Most likely no. Were your great-grandparents alive in 1910? Perhaps. So this is the time frame that we're looking at. We're looking back to the year 1910. So the map shows us that there was a lot of forested areas, a lot of grassland. And if we look at these colors down here, do you see any orange agriculture? Do you see any purple urban areas like cities or towns? No. So back in the year 1910, this area was pretty pristine. So this would be what the natural regions, so when you in grade 4 study the natural regions, this would be kind of the way it was. And if we look up here, these are our environmental indicators. This first dial represents the area of natural landscapes. So yeah, in 1910, this whole area, 100% was natural landscapes. And there was 100% grizzly habitat and 100% fish habitat. Everything was good for the fish and for the mammals. If we look down here, water quality, well, that was at 86%. And this has to do with levels of phosphorus. Phosphorus comes from fertilizer. So 86% water quality. We had 79% biotic carbon storage. So that sounds really big, I know, but it's not. Bio means living, carbon is carbon, storage is storage. So this is just the amount of carbon that is being stored in the grasses, in the trees, and the soil. We want this to be high. And this number over here, CO2, this is man-made CO2. And in the year 1910, it was at 0. Of course, because we hadn't started oil and gas production, we didn't have cars, we didn't have furnaces in our house in 1910. So in general, the environment, it would get 2 thumbs up. It's really good. And if we look over here at our social economic performance, it's saying that there were 0 people living here at the time. Now that's not exactly correct because of course we had all the indigenous people that lived in the area. We also had some tiny communities. Calgary would have existed already. It would just been really small. But the reason why the simulator is showing 0 is because it was like there were 0 people living here. They didn't have a huge impact on the land like we do today. This second dial here is GDP, gross domestic product. Once again, this is a big word, but don't be afraid of it because all it really means is the amount of money that's in the economy. But listen to the news because they always talk about GDP on the news. So this is at 0 right now because we hadn't yet started oil and gas production. We hadn't started large scale logging or timber production. And we didn't even have large scale agriculture. This land wasn't even cleared yet. If it was cleared, it would be orange, but it's still yellow. It's still native grassland. And look at this one. Number of swimming pools, water consumption. Well, we weren't really using any water because do you think in those days people had running water in their house? Do you think you could have a 15-minute shower every morning? No. So this doesn't really exist, but our environmental health is really good. What I'm going to do now is we're going to time travel. I'm going to press play. We're going to time travel 110 years in a few seconds. And I'll show this a few times, but this is your job. You have a job to do. I need you to watch the map and tell me what you think the most obvious changes are. And then look at these dials and see, are the dials changing? Which dials changed? And is there a relationship between what happened on the map and what happened on the dials? All right, I am going to press play. We're going to time travel. And if you want to comment in the question and answer what you think the biggest changes on the map or the dials are, go for it. So here we are, 1910. And now we're going to 1920. 1930, 40, 50, 1960, 70, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020. So, did you see any change? Look at the map right now. I see a lot of change. Look at the dials. Yep, they seem to have changed to me. We'll watch it one more time. And then, Robert, maybe we'll go to the question and answer and see if anybody's commented. So what are the biggest changes that you're seeing?
We do have an answer in the Q&A. They've identified agriculture, people, and CO2 emissions.
Oh, exactly. And so if we just look at the map, just the map, the biggest changes we see are the purple. Look how big Calgary got and all of these surrounding communities. And this used to be all yellow and now it's orange. We can also look down here. These numbers tell us what's happening too. So we went from 0 agriculture to 722,000 hectares. Now, hectares, that's such a weird measurement because I don't think most people think in hectares. But just to give you an idea, so this is a standard track field. So think about if you've ever seen a track field or one of the high schools in your area might have a track field. That's about 1 hectare. Okay, so within the watershed, we actually gained 722,800 hectares in agriculture. We also gained 138,000 hectares in the purple in the cities and towns. So you're right, way more people. Well, of course, because Calgary is a great place to live, everybody wants to live here. And if we look up here, let's figure out what's happened to our dials over this time. Often when I do this with classes, we just use thumbs up and thumbs down. So I'm going to do that for you. Okay. Natural landscapes. What happened to that? And if you click on any one of these dials, oh yeah, natural landscapes went down. And grizzly habitat went from 100% to 0%. We lost all the grizzly habitat. Fish habitat, 100% down to 58%. Look at water quality down to 28%. Do we need clean, good water? Of course we do. And our water quality went down to 28%. We lost some biotic carbon storage. And as you mentioned in the question and answer, yeah, look at this. We went from 0 CO2 emissions to 37.4 million tons. And once again, if you click on this, you can see what happened. It explains the number, and there's a video linking back to the CO2. So I would say, in general, our environment went downhill. Our environment got worse in that 110 years. Good or bad? I think it's bad that our environment got worse. But what if we look over here? Our social economic performance. Well, now there were more people living here. Well, that's good. If there are more people living here, then we have a stronger economy. And look at the amount of money in the economy went up. And it went up because we had all of this oil and gas production that started in the watershed. And we had logging in the watershed over here. And we had all of this agricultural production. So people could have food to eat, and farmers were able to put in their crops and sell their crops, so they had money so they could buy things from other people. That's all part of this GDP number. And then we also had, yeah, a lot more water was used. So this gives us an idea of how things have changed since the year 1910. Is the overall change good or bad? You want to throw it into the chat. What do you think? Good or bad? If we were doing this in a class, I would say, is it thumbs up good, thumbs down bad? Are you getting any responses, Robert? It can be a tough question.
Yeah, this one I think more thumbs down than thumbs up.
Yeah, and you're right. Environmental health went down. Well, we depend on a clean environment. But we also do need some money and food to eat. And at the moment, we need some oil and gas to drive our cars. And we do need lumber so that we can build houses and schools and hospitals. So this is kind of the conundrum that we're in. We need these things from the land, from the watershed, but we also need a healthy watershed. So how do we balance those two things out? All right, in Alberta Tomorrow, that was a historical simulation that we did, but we can also do what's called a business as usual scenario. Business as usual is exactly as it sounds. It's just what would happen if we conduct business as usual, if we keep on doing the things we have and in the way that we have. Business as usual. This simulator allows us to time travel into the future, but remember, it's not like this is a crystal ball. I don't have a crystal ball that I can say this is exactly what would happen in the future in 30 years. But what it is it's an educated guess. So all we're doing is we're taking the change that took place in the last 30 years and we're projecting it 30 years into the future. So we get to catch a glimpse of what the future watershed might be. So now you can see we're starting from where we ended off before. Grizzlies were at 0, water quality at 28%. We've got 1.5 million people living in the area at the time. I'm going to press play, and we're now going to time travel 30 years into the future. I'm going to warn you, we're only looking at 30 years. Before we looked at 110 years. And also, we're only looking at an area that has already been changed significantly. So how much more change can there be? I don't know. Okay, so we are going to press play. You're going to have to watch a little bit more closely. So watch the dials, watch the screen, and watch these numbers. So here we go in the year 2000, 2030, 40, and 50. Watch it again. And if you want to type into the Q&A what changes you're seeing this time, what jumps out at you most, we'll watch it again. So not as much change, but there's still quite a bit of change. So did the dials change much? Yeah, they changed. Did these ones? Yeah. Robert, are there any comments in the question and answer?
Not yet.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that. Let's point out some things then. So if we look down here, yeah?
We did have one come in, too many people.
Yeah, look, oh my gosh.
The water has gone down quite a bit.
Exactly. So we went from 1.5 million people to 2.5 million people. That's a big change. So what is the impact of all of those people having? Well, we can see that natural landscapes, we lost even more of them. Grizzly habitat was already at 0%, so we're still at 0%. Fish habitat went from 57% to 33%. Water quality went down. Biotic carbon storage went down. And greenhouse gases, they went way up. Okay, well, you've got another million people. That's another million people driving their cars and heating their homes and so on. So greenhouse gases are going to go up. If we look at our social economic performance, what's happened? More people. GDP. Oh, GDP went down. Why would GDP go down if in the previous 110 years it went up, up, up? Well, let's look what happened here. Oil and gas production went down. Now remember, this is oil and gas production, the projected amount in this watershed. So basically, we're using up some of the conventional oil sources that we have in this watershed. There could be other areas of the province that it's still going up, but in this watershed, it's projected to go down. Logging also contributes to GDP. It went up a little bit, but agriculture went down. Well, remember how much it increased in the first 110 years? And water consumption, yeah, went up. Once again, an extra million people, they're using a lot of water, having all those showers and washing their cars and washing their, well, they shouldn't be washing their cars on the street, washing their clothes and dishes and watering their lawns. So let's have a look here. I would say, in general, the environmental health in the next 30 years will continue to go down. And I don't know about you guys, but that makes me kind of sad. And the simulator can't actually show to the year 2080, another 30 years, but I'm pretty sure you can guess what, if we just do this business as usual, what would most likely continue to happen. Before we move on, Robert, are there any other questions or comments on the historical scenario that we looked at or the business as usual scenario?
Not yet. There is a question about the tool itself. They're wondering whether or not the simulator will work on an iPad.
Yes, it will. Remember that you've got less screen real estate to show all of these things, but it'll totally work on an iPad.
Perfect.
All right. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the third type of scenario that you can do with Alberta Tomorrow. So I have shown you the historic, I've shown you the business as usual scenario. Now we are going to make our own land use plan. So this land use plan we will create for the same watershed. So here's the province of Alberta. We're going to click on the Nelson River drainage area. Then we're going to click on the Bow watershed. And you can see that there are actually sub-watersheds. So depending on where you live in Calgary, you may be within the fish sub-watersheds, you may be in the Lower Bow Crowfoot, you may be in the Elbow River watershed, you could be in the Jumping Pound River watershed. And you could explore these sub-watersheds. However, today we're going to do the entire Bow watershed. And the reason for doing that is a combination. So we catch all the you guys watching, but also the larger the study area you have, the more change you're going to see, and it's a little easier to figure out what's going on. All right, we're going to click next. And when we click next, we have to name our scenario. So we're going to call this My Future Plan for the Bow River Watershed. Now, what do I want to do with this plan? Well, we saw the business as usual. We kind of know what might happen in the next 30 years if we keep on doing business as usual, what we always have been doing. So I'm going to try to improve the environmental indicators while maintaining the economy. Because
sorry, there was a quick question regarding the future. Why was the water going down? Where is it going?
So the water quality, if that's what they mean. So the water quality was going down for a few reasons. First of all, we had an extra million people. Those million people were using detergents, soaps that have phosphorus in them. We had agricultural areas that are still putting on the fertilizer that contains phosphorus. And think about the last summer before, you may have heard about lakes in central Alberta having algal blooms. So there were some warnings, don't swim in this lake, there's too much blue-green algae. Sometimes in the winter we have fish kills, so people get to their cabins and there are a bunch of fish washed up on shore because there wasn't enough oxygen in the water. When we put fertilizer on our lawns, on our crops, when we use detergents that have phosphates and nitrates in them, that all ends up in the river. So I don't know if you've ever noticed Maybe Calgary is better. Have you ever seen someone washing their car on their street with soap? I know there's a bylaw in Calgary, but sometimes people don't pay attention to bylaws. But when that soap gets into a water body, or if the fertilizer gets into a water body, it causes the algae to grow, and the algae grows and grows and grows and grows. And then the algae dies and it starts to decompose. And when it decomposes, it uses up oxygen in the water. So that all contributes to the water quality going down. So in Alberta tomorrow, we have water quality, and then we have water consumption or use. So water quality is going down in the future. Water consumption, how much water we're using, is going up. So I hope that answers your question. All right, so we've named our future plan. And if you weren't happy about water quality going down, let's try and change it. Let's try and get water quality up. You'll notice that we have all of these same dials here, but now there's a goal slider at the bottom. You need to decide, what do you want the future to be like? If we were at 45% natural landscapes in the future, do I want that to keep going down? Well, if you go over here, we've got a bunch of videos. You can watch a video on natural landscapes. You can watch video on wildlife habitat, water quality. You'll see that the more natural landscapes there are, the better that is for wildlife, the better that is for fish, the better that is for water quality, the better that is for biocarbon storage, the better that is for getting greenhouse gases down. So I don't personally want to keep losing natural landscapes. I want more natural landscapes in the future. But if I go back to my model, the other thing that you need to keep in mind is, if I want more natural landscapes, then I have to take away either some pink, which are cities and towns. And are we going to get rid of Calgary? Most likely not. Or we have to get rid of some orange, which is agriculture. So we can do that in the simulator. So I'm going to try and get more natural landscapes. Grizzly habitat. Okay, realistically, are we going to get 100% grizzly habitat back in the Bow watershed with all 2.5 million people? Probably not. Do I want to try and get maybe close to 5% grizzly habitat? Fish habitat? Well, I want that to get better. Water quality? I want that to get better. Is it realistic to get water quality back to 100% if I have all of this agriculture? Probably not. So you have to think about these. And don't worry, if you don't set them right the first time, you can change them later. Biotic carbon storage. Remember, that's the carbon being stored in the grasses, the trees, the soil. If it's in those things, it's not up in the atmosphere. So we want that to be high. And oh my gosh, greenhouse gas emissions, I want to get those down. We've all heard about climate change. We need to start doing something about it. In general, I would say I'm trying to get the environment better. That was my goal, right? Now, if we go down to the social economic, we also have to set goals for these. Now, this one's tricky. How many people do we want living in this area? In this watershed, there's 1.5 million people currently. We saw that it's going to go up to 2.5 if we keep on growing as we have. Do I want to double the population? Well, I don't want population to go down. I can't realistically force people to leave. So let's see if we can get the population up to like 2 million. GDP, everybody wants money. Everybody needs money. So can we try and maintain GDP? Can we try and maintain oil and gas production? I don't know. We saw the business as usual. Remember, it said that oil and gas production is going to go down. Can we increase timber production, so logging and forestry? Can we increase agriculture? Can we get water consumption down? Southern Alberta, we don't have a whole lot of water. We think about the model, half of our water, 80% of our water is in the northern half of the province, but 80% of our population is in the southern half of the province. So down here in Calgary, we're kind of worried about how much water we have available to us, since we've got 80% of the population and only 20% of the water. So I'm going to try and get water consumption down. Now I'm going to click next. Remember, we can come back to these later. Your first thing you have to do was set your goals. Second thing you have to do is try and figure out how are you going to reach those goals. Just going to zoom in here a little bit to the most populated area. Now, I can decide to draw or create more agriculture, more grassland, more water, more wetlands. I wanted to get natural areas up, so I'm going to have to draw some more natural areas. So let's say around between Airdrie and Calgary, can we convert some of this agricultural land back into native grassland? What about over here by Chestermere? Do you guys know, were you alive during the flood? The flood, if we had some more wetlands, maybe the flood wouldn't have been as bad as it was for Calgary and surrounding areas. So let's add some wetlands. I think there's some grade 5 classes. You guys have probably been talking about wetlands. Forested areas. Can we try and convert some of this back into forest? Because that's what it used to be. And remember, I wanted Calgary to grow. I still wanted to get to 2 million people. So let's have Calgary grow down here. So all I'm doing is I'm dropping a pin. I'm saying I want to try and grow these areas where I drop that pin. The simulator will decide if it's possible or not. So watch this. Let's try and grow some population right on top of alpine areas, on top of mountains. Let's see if it'll do it. Shouldn't. All right, this is the change that I want to have happen in the next 30 years. I'm going to click next. We're going to ignore these things for a second. These are beneficial management practices, things that maybe we can do to try and improve the environment. We're going to come back to these just because I want to see what it's like without them. There are 3 different climate change scenarios in Alberta tomorrow, but we're just going to leave it at medium. You can change that if you want. I'm going to run this scenario. Now, Alberta tomorrow is all based on Alberta research, Alberta data. We've got equations that are going to calculate if we change population by this much, what's going to happen to the area of, or sorry, to water quality or say greenhouse gas emissions. I'll zoom in a little bit. And once again, you can see all the pins that I dropped. We're going to press play and see what the future will look like based on the changes that I wanted to have happen. And you can see there's Calgary growing, and there's all the grassland, high industrial level. Okay, so we might have to adjust our industrial level. Look at this. I wanted to build on top of the mountain. It didn't happen, but look, it did build on the lower parts of the mountain along the highway. All that means is that's where it's possible to happen, but it's not possible to happen up here. Okay, so we saw the change happen on the map. What was the result on our goal sliders? I had a goal. If we look at these dots, if they're red, I didn't reach my goal. If they're yellow, I got close. And if they're green, I did. Okay, I didn't reach any of my environmental goals. I reached, oh, look at that. I made my GDP goal and I reached my, managed to maintain oil and gas production, but none of my environmental goals were met. So we can do 3 different things to try and reach this goal. We can click on the goal and say, maybe that was unrealistic. Maybe we can't get to 60%. Or maybe I feel really strongly about getting to 60%. So then I want to go back to the pencil and I can actually draw or decide that I want to have more natural landscapes. So I can run the scenario again and see what happens, but I'm gonna say I probably still won't reach my goal. But let's see. Press play. So I'm going to 46%. 47%, 40, no, didn't reach 48%. So I still haven't reached this goal. Then we're gonna go down here where it says management. So these are the beneficial management practices. And remember the simulator told me my industrial activity was too high. Industrial activity is the amount of oil and gas production, timber production is taking place within the watershed. But watch this, it's at 30%. If I increase it to 100%, then I reach, oh, I've doubled it. Look at that. GDP went way up, but I'm still not reaching any of my environmental goals. It was at 30%. Let's try and decrease it to say 21%. Oh, well, then I don't reach my GDP goal. Okay, let's keep it at 30% for a while, but then we'll look at other things we can do. Down here is a list of beneficial management practices. These are things that will allow things to get better for the environment. For example, if farmers used agricultural fertilizer best practices, look at this water quality, 28%. If we use best practices, it jumped to 40% and I was able to reach my goal. So if farmers carefully applied their fertilizer, water quality is going to get better. What about water use down here? Didn't even come close to reaching my goal, but if farmers use water conservation, if cities and towns use water conservation, and I'm sure you do in your school, if the energy sector uses water conservation, we've already gone from a red to a yellow, so we're getting closer. What if we use more renewables? Look at this. If we use more renewables, oh, our greenhouse gases go down. And if we phase out electricity or coal electricity, they go down even more. And if we use electrical heating and conservation, they go down even more. And if you're driving electrical vehicles, they go down even more. And if we build up, so go back to my model just really quickly, if we build up instead of taking away other colors, so increasing the density of our cities and towns, that will help me reach some of my goals. We decrease our industrial footprint and we use carbon capture and storage. Look, I reached my water quality goal. I got a whole lot closer on a lot of my other ones. Once again, I would say to you guys, this is not good enough. You need to go back and you need to come up with a better plan where we're reaching our goals. We're making a plan and then we're trying to reach those goals. I'm going to give you a chance to type in some questions into the chat and show you some of the other features that are on the simulator while you're getting those questions in. So first of all, for teachers, under teacher resources, you'll see all the lesson plans. We have a whole set of videos. There are tutorial videos. If you've forgotten how to do any of these things, you can watch those again. There are, for each of the dials, there are videos. And down here, there are points of interest videos. So if you want to listen to a glaciologist talking about how she studies glaciers and climate change, talk to Dr. Ali down here. Walk on the Athabasca Glacier with me and with Peter Lemieux, who did tours on the glacier for probably 25, 30 years. If you want to talk about fish kills, talk to Dr. Mike Sullivan right here. He is an expert on fish in Alberta. So all these videos are here for you to look at. We also have virtual tours of Alberta's ecoregions. So if grade 4s, you want to look at what it's like in the Canadian Shield, click on this one, turn on your sound, and you can hear the sounds of the Canadian Shield and learn about the plants, the animals, the species at risk, the land uses that take place there. It's all there on little hotspots you can click on. You can zoom in and out. I've already shown you how you can make the 3 types of scenarios. Also, if you're going out and taking water quality tests, you can enter your observations right here into the simulator, and then students from across the province will see what you got for water quality. We've already got some here from the Elbow River and from the Bow River. If we go down a little bit more, you can create reports. You can prove how good your plan is. So you can say, okay, I'm going to create a report and I want to add these first 3. I'll just click on add. You add those first 3 to a report, and then at the bottom, you can actually email it to your teacher or email it to your parents or post it on social media. You guys can compete for who gets the most badges. You get awards. There are also quests down here that you can go on. So a quest about water use in Alberta, for example. If you fulfill these 3 tasks, you'll get a bunch of points. And then if you look down here within your class or within your school, you can compete to see who can get the most points. All of these are there for you for free. You just need to register. So you have a student account or a teacher account if you're the teacher, and away you go. You can compete. So Robert, do we have any questions that have come in?
There was one related to the early sort of transition from 1910 to 2020. Why didn't the fish habitat population go down as much as the bear did?
Oh, so that's a great question. Bears are kind of what we call the keystone species. They are the ones where we'll see the impact of land use and human population first. So because our population went from 1.5 million people, or 0 to 1.5 million people, the grizzlies, they don't like the roads, the tractors, the agriculture, the hiking trails, the cities, the towns. Basically, we changed, what would you say, like 3/4 of their habitat, we changed from natural regions to either purple or orange. So that was huge. Now, in terms of the fish habitat, yeah, it did go down from 100% to 57%. So that's quite a bit. But I guess the impact was more when the water quality got impacted than the fish habitat got impacted. And you know what? There's a video here on fish habitat that you can learn about how fish need to travel from one area to another. And when we have a culvert or a road going through or over a stream, we have to make sure that those fish can get from one place to the other. So fish habitat didn't change as quickly, but it still changed quite a bit. And then also into the future, it will change quite a bit more if we keep increasing the number of roads and seismic lines and things like that. Any other questions come in?
This one's related to the water. So because water quality goes down, consumption goes up, climate change impacts everything. How much of that, reduces the amount of water that we have?
Okay, good question. So first of all, when we're looking at water consumption, just want you to think about meters cubed, okay? And so in school, I'm sure you use meter sticks. So a meter cubed is a meter by a meter by a meter, okay? So just to have a picture in your mind. Now, a lot of water consumption in southern Alberta is actually taken up by, well, oil and gas production to a certain extent, but also by irrigation. So I'm going to just zoom down here to Lethbridge area and see, can you see all of these circles? Those circles are all caused by irrigation systems. So it's like a giant sprinkler that's shooting water out in a circle in a square field. We use a lot of water in southern Alberta to water crops. So if we're talking about climate change, and remember this is a medium climate change scenario, climate change will impact how much water we're using, how much water is available, because with warmer temperatures, we're going to have more evaporation of the water, surface water. But also, as these areas get drier, we're going to have to use more water. So then water consumption is going to go up because we're using more, and we need to use more on more areas because climate change has caused areas to dry up. Hope that answers the question.
And that's it for now. So.
Okay, so we're going to go back to the presentation. And I have a question for you. Do you have a better understanding of the Bow River watershed now? We're going to look at this cartoon. So what do you want the watershed to be like in the future? This cartoon has a bunch of people sitting around a desk, and they're all saying, What if we don't change it all and something just magically happens? Do you think we're going to get the future we want if we don't make a plan and try and follow through with that plan? Do you think we're going to get the future we want for the Bow watershed if we just go, whatever, we'll see what happens, we'll just keep doing what we have been doing? No, we need to make some change. We need to set those goals, decide what we want to have happen in the watershed, and then we need to follow through with those goals. I want to go back to our Menti question. I have another Menti question for you. Now this one, though, is having to do with, sorry. So what words describe your plan for your future Bow River watershed plan? So you're making a plan for the Bow River for the future. What words would you use to describe it? What are you going to try and achieve? What do we need to think about? I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And if you have any other questions, make sure you put them in the question and answer. We've got about 4 minutes left. So get your Menti questions in and any other questions you have. Let's see if we have any results here yet. No words? Maybe the question was too tough. Or maybe I didn't set it up right. That could be too. I apologize if that's the case. Robert, do we have any other questions that have come in?
No, nothing yet.
Okay. I want to point out that coming in the next month or two, we are incorporating an Indigenous module. So soon you will be able to pick map layers where you can look at Treaty 7, Treaty 4, Treaty 6 from 1876. You'll be able to look at what the traditional languages are for various areas of the province, what the traditional territories were, and then look at individual reserves and see the difference in size from the traditional territory to the reserve that our Indigenous people were placed on. So that's coming very soon. And my final question to you, now that you can see change in the watershed, what's your plan for the watershed? I challenge you to register for an account at albertatomorrow.ca, watch the videos, look at the satellite imagery, make a historical plan, make a business as usual plan, try and create your own plan for the Bow River watershed so that you can reach the goals, reach the goals you want to see in the future. And the last point I want to make is, we go back to my model, remember that there are going to be what we call trade-offs. So we can't physically get more pink Lego on here without taking something else away, unless we build up. So that's an example of a trade-off. Maybe in the next 30 years, maybe people live in smaller houses so we can get more people living in the same area instead of taking away other colors. That's a trade-off. Maybe we decide to drive electrical vehicles instead of driving gasoline-powered vehicles. That's a trade-off. That's a choice. Maybe the EV is a little more expensive right now, but in the end, it might save you money. These are all trade-offs. And it's not easy to change. We know that. But we need to make some change if we're going to get the future that we want for the Bow watershed. We are exactly at 12 o'clock. So Robert, do we have any other questions that have come in?
No.
All right. Well, my email address is at the bottom there. Feel free to email me, follow us on Pinterest, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. There is also a BC tomorrow if you want to look at BC, and we are expanding to Canada tomorrow. So in the future, we will hopefully have one of these for every province. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you guys learned a lot. There's a ton of information in Alberta tomorrow, and I know you're mostly grade 4s and 5s, but you know what? You guys can do this. I know that it's up to you to make a better plan for the future, and I know you can do it. Thanks, Robert, for